Thank you, Carolyn. Good morning. So I'm here to help set the stage a little bit and just give you a brief overview of some of the work that we're doing at NIEHS as well as NIH as a whole in relation to data science. And mostly I'm going to do that by talking about the things that Carolyn said we're not going to talk about. So I guess I'll just put all those controversial topics back on the table and you can decide what to do with them. So I'm going to talk a bit about is there a data problem, or really what is the nature of the data problem. As I mentioned, what NIEHS and NIH are doing to try to address that, a little bit about data sharing, and what can we do as sort of next steps going forward from here. And before I start, let me just second what Carolyn mentioned in terms of thanking the Standing Committee as a whole for their work over many years and taking on very important topics in environmental health science, and this is just another good example of those. And I want to also thank the NIEHS staff, who, as Carolyn mentioned, do an outstanding job on every single one of those issues. And I want to thank the Planning Committee, of which I was just a small member, but especially Carolyn for taking the leadership of that group, and over 6 months, a lot of trial and tribulation to get us here today. So why is there a data problem, or what is the nature of that? Again, as Carolyn alluded to, the pace, the way that we conduct research across all of the life sciences has really undergone a dramatic transformation over the past 2 decades, such that all of science is increasingly collaborative, and this especially pertains to environmental health science. I think it's just very interdisciplinary in its own nature. And so that implies that we are just increasingly overwhelmed by computational biology and very much data-driven. So really the bottleneck in many respects in terms of scientific productivity has shifted from generating the data to what do we do with the data? How do we handle the data? How do we store it? How do we analyze it? How do we communicate it? So we really need, I think, sort of a paradigm shift in terms of developing a new research ecosystem that will support new data management plans that will enable us to integrate data across different databases so that we can share data more uniformly. So these are just a few factoids about the nature of the data problem. So currently we generate 1.8 zettabytes, and I can never figure out what any of these, like if I get past gigabyte, I'm pretty much lost. So we produce 1.8 zettabytes, 10 to the 21st of data every year. Every 2 days, we create as much information as we did from the dawn of civilization up until 2003. And the world's information doubles every 2 years. So these are just like almost incomprehensible data, and these data are already 2 to 1 year old. So this is just a little schematic that helps me get a better handle again around the data that we are producing and how we go about trying to handle that. So those 1.8 zettabytes of data that we produce in 1 year are the equivalent of every person in the United States tweeting 3 tweets per minute for 27,000 years. And I've never tweeted at all, so I'm not making my contribution to this. I'm sure some people are compensating for that. Or it is also the equivalent of 200 billion movies, each of which is 2 hours long, that it would take one person 47 million years to watch. And this is just another schematic representation of that. If you are able to store these 1.8 zettabytes of information on Apple iPads, it would take approximately 58 billion of those, which would create this mountain that's about 25 times higher than Mount Fuji. And if you were to purchase these 58 billion Apple iPads, it would cost you $34 trillion, which is the equivalent of the annual GDP of the United States, China, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Italy combined. So this is just, again, sort of a representation to me of what we face in terms of trying to address data science. We are just overwhelmed, inundated by the amount of data that we produce, and how do we go about really trying to store, handle, analyze those data. So some of you are probably familiar with the relatively new NIEHS strategic plan that we released last year, and many of you, I'm sure, probably participated in the development of that plan. And I just want to mention that the mission of NIEHS relates very much to health promotion and disease prevention in order to improve public health. So it's very much a public health-driven mission and vision and implementation of NIEHS funded and supported research. And within that strategic plan, there is very much an emphasis on data and knowledge management, such that knowledge management is really seen as an underpinning or a foundation for all of the research that NIEHS supports, whether that's a basic research or more translational research or more applied research. And there is, I think, an acknowledgement, a consensus developing around the idea that we really need more expertise and more resources applied to how we handle data in environmental health science, so that we can support the development of bioinformatics, biostatistics, and data integration tools, and we can invest in publicly available databases and methods and applications for data analysis so that we can enhance our capability to better integrate data. So why is it that NIEHS and NTP, the National Toxicology Program, should be interested in this more coordinated or integrated data world? So what we see really is the ultimate application is this idea of accelerating the translation of research findings into clinical and public health practice. And of course, that's a nice big mission and goal to have, and it's not an easy one to achieve. But there are a number of steps that we can take along that path. So for example, if we can enhance the sharing of research-generated data, we really enable more collaboration, more interaction, more interdisciplinary research to take place. We can also support the development of new methods, new tools, and importantly, we are able to capitalize upon our existing and future investments in research, and that's especially important in an era of limited budgets. So with respect to environmental health science, I would agree with Carolyn that we're a little late in getting to the table in terms of dealing with data science, and there's much we can learn, as we will hear shortly, from our colleagues who've addressed this more specifically and more thoroughly over the past decade or so, especially in terms of genetics research. But there are some, I think, different considerations for environmental health that we need to consider during the course of this meeting as we go forward. And one is simply the heterogeneity and the complexity of environmental and biological measurements. So for example, if we just take a dust sample, which is a pretty common environmental sampling, what does that mean? Where is that collected? How is it sampled? How is it stored? What is analyzed? How is it analyzed? Do we collect any of those metadata around a quantitative assessment of what's in a dust sample? And there are a number of issues that I would say that are related to privacy and ethical concerns, as well as the regulatory implications of environmental data that I think are very special, if not unique, that need important consideration within what we're talking about over the next 2 days. So to start to try to address some of those issues, NIEHS did sponsor a workshop similar to this on data sharing about a year ago. That issued a number of recommendations. They fall into two broad categories, I would say. One is to try to develop some common vocabularies as well as common methodologies. And the second is to try to ensure that our data sharing and our data management plans do actually try to address these privacy and ethical issues. And that we do that up front, we do that before we start an experiment or carry out any sort of prospective study, so that we really are able to ensure that the data that we produce can be integrated with those from other studies. So NIH as a whole is carrying out this similar effort to try to address big data in biomedical science. So about 6 months ago, the advisory committee to the director of NIH issued a set of 5 recommendations, which are that we need to promote data sharing through central or federated catalogs and databases. How do we make those databases able to talk to each other? Can we make them interoperable? We should support the development of methods and applications in bioinformatics. We need to increase the quantitative science skill sets of current scientists, such as myself, as well as the training of future scientists. Somewhat amazingly, there is not a data strategic plan for NIH. And we need to provide a funding commitment to enable all of that to take place. These are just the sort of big issues that NIH has identified. And some, in many respects, this seems self-evident, and most of it is relatively intuitive. But I think it's important, again, just to sort of plant these seeds in your mind as we talk through this over the next couple of days. So, can we find the data is the first question. And in many respects, the answer to that is no. So, lots of databases exist. It's very fragmented, they're individualized, or they're in a certain department, and we don't have more of a uniform, coordinated universe of data access. So can we find the data? Can we access the data? So oftentimes, if you can even locate the data, really being able to access it, utilize it, make it manageable is a bigger challenge. Do we have the policies and practices that enable data integration and data sharing? How do we organize, process big data? Do we have the methods, the analytical tools to analyze those data? And again, we need to be able to train both our current workforce as well as the developing workforce to take advantage of these data. So NIH is in the process of developing what's called a Big Data to Knowledge initiative. It consists of 4 components. Those are developing the policies, the cataloging the data sets, developing the standards for data and metadata, and doing all that in collaboration with the extramural research community. To develop the analysis methods and tools for biomedical big data, to enhance training through supplements to existing training grants, for example, as well as new training grants that are more focused on data science, and to establish centers for biomedical big data. And some examples of those might be related to cataloging and citation mechanisms, electronic health records, privacy, and visualization. And so I'll just end by saying a little bit about some thoughts that we at NIEHS have had in terms of how we can enhance this approach to a more integrated data world. And really the major idea behind that is this first bullet, to really changing the mindset, the culture that we have now for data management and dissemination practices. And the rest of these are just examples of some means by which we can go about achieving that goal. So can we identify methods for harmonization, storage, analysis, and management of data? Can we develop data management and sharing standards for the entire life cycle of data? Do we know how to store and locate our data? Do we have the right types of repositories or databases? And importantly, I think we need to be able to coordinate and carry out all this work with our colleagues at other NIH institutes, at other federal agencies, non-government organizations, academic institutions, and private industry. So I'll stop there, and I'll be glad to address any questions. And if not, thank you very much, and I look forward to a fascinating day and a half.